So, Marta Wilde, after the success and the fun we had on the dual podcast with hubby Cliff, we've come back for a second go, but just you today, because I'm really interested in digging into your spiritual side, your conscious side, if you like, your consciousness side. And who knows what we're going to go on today's podcast, who knows? But thank you so very much for agreeing to join me again.
Awesome. I'm so happy to be here. You're talking about spiritual side. It's funny, like what it says on my jumper. You can see because we're on video now, but you probably need to read it out loud to the guys listening.
Spiritual gangster, yeah. I've got a t-shirt that says that as well. So we're kindred spirits in the murk.
I love these guys. I love the t-shirts. All of their stuff is awesome. I've been buying it for the last, 3 or 4 years, I think.
So I'm right in thinking that this is something that you're deeply involved with. You're deeply aligned with this spiritual side of self. How did that come about? Because weren't you at one point in the fitness industry?
Absolutely. That's where Cliff and I met originally in 2009. He was coming from corporate finance. I was coming from corporate recruitment job, and like two corporate heads knew that wasn't for them anymore. And we met on our personal training qualification course. And the thing is that it was, to start with, for both of us, what we do was very focused on nutrition and the physical side of being. However, as we moved on, it was one of our mentors that I'm not going to even say that started this path for me, because it was almost like a reawakening.
Yeah.
Because I knew you were going to ask that question. See, that's telepathically, I clearly knew what Webb was going to ask. And I was thinking to myself, actually, how did it start? You know what's fascinating? That I'm from Poland originally. I can't remember if I mentioned that on our first podcast. I think I did briefly. When I went home last year to clear out, like, even though I've not lived there for 15 years, my room is still my room. Like, most of my stuff is gone from there, but I still had little like treasure chest or diaries and journals and stuff. And I found some of my old poems that I used to write as a 15-year-old and books that I used to read and some essays from school. And when I was reading them, I was thinking, holy shit, I was really tapped into that stuff even back then as a teenager, but didn't quite realize. And I remember a moment where my bedroom was being repainted and we were like dragging all the old wallpaper of the walls and ripping it all off and stuff like that. And I was standing up on the ladder right by the ceiling, and I had that moment where I was like, whoa, what is that? I don't know whether it was the physical elevation, like high up from the floor or whatever, but something just washed over me. And I just felt like there was something else than just the flesh and the bones that I'm carrying around with me. And I can't even describe to you what it was and why it happened, but there was just something that made me think and believe there's something greater. And I guess for several years after that, that was my late teenage years or my early 20s. And for several years after that, I now looking back can see how I was being guided towards certain books, certain seminars, towards certain mentors and coaches, and people were just put in my path to challenge and probe and open me up to things like that. And that for majority of people, I guess, probably will be quite challenging to understand and to grasp, because we can't physically touch them, and it's difficult for a lot of human beings to comprehend something that we can't physically measure or touch. And it just kind of rolled on from there. And that second significant moment was one of our mentors that just started talking about things greater than us, and the fact that, energy and focus and intention and things like that. And it just rolled like a snowball effect from there.
It's fascinating because I often think it's a very similar path to my own. I mean, I was the kid that used to bring Ralph Waldo Emerson back from the library at 10 years old, and my mum would just sit there like,
what are you doing?
What's wrong with my son? And there's a funny thing where she actually took me to the doctors to get checked because they thought there was something wrong. Because I wasn't like a normal kid. I was looking at deep philosophical texts and books and such like. And the doctor, I always remember, just looked at my mum and said, he'll grow out of it, right? And it always seems that we have this sort of episode, this sort of event where we somehow get in tune with something greater than ourselves. We have this
Yeah.
realization, maybe not a full-blown awareness, but this small realization that there's something more. And it takes us years sometimes to come back and investigate it. How long did it take you to actually sit down and think, oh my God, this actually is the way, this is the path?
Do you know what? From the moment up on the ladder, refurbishing my bedroom, repainting my bedroom, that was probably between 15 to probably more. Actually, hang on a minute. No. We're looking more like 20 years, probably.
Wow.
Probably, yeah. But to be honest, you know what? When you were saying that, to me, it's just a re-remembrance, really, the way I look at it. And, Cliff and I, from the physiological and spiritual and mindset side, we helped so many people. And you don't understand why I'm getting at this in a second. We've helped so many people have children that thought they couldn't have children. And I think there's 8 or 9 of like Cliff and Marta babies running around.
Hey,
at the moment,
you might want to clarify that, because that does sound.
Yeah, literally, Cliff always stresses that it's with no involvement of his other than the physical, like, therapeutical,
the guidance,
guidance and stuff like that. Even though we decided not to have children of our own, there's 8 or 9 of Cliff and Marta babies running around, right? The oldest, I think, is 4 or 5 now. But regardless, the reason I'm saying this is that several of these kids, obviously, we stay in touch with the parents and how they talk about their children and what the kids are doing, how they speaking, how they behaving when they're very young, obviously old enough to be able to speak and communicate, but still before school, because that's really the first moment where we mostly forget what it's really like to be completely in tune with nature, everything, the greatest stuff, whatever it might be. And as an example, one of our clients who had one child 3 years ago is pregnant now again. And the little one is 3 years old. Like I said, she still doesn't know her mom is pregnant with another one.
Right.
Over the last few weeks, she started coming to her mom, putting her head on her belly and saying, "Mommy, I want to be a baby in your tummy again."
Wow.
How does she know? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
I truly believe that we're all born with the ability to connect to far more than just the human experience, but we forget very quickly. So if we're talking from then till now, it was probably more like 30 years.
Wow.
But I believe it goes in stages. And when we look back, we can only ever see it looking back, right? When we look back, we can see those moments, like the few moments that I described in my life, that kind of all connect together. And you know this, and I know you'll agree with that as well, that there's never a final moment anyway, because we continue growing and expanding all the time, right? And exploring what else is out there, whether it's for some people they're more physical, for other people they're more metaphysical, right? And something out there that's elusive, that's not tangible, but we all continue to explore. And I feel for me it's about bringing balance between the two, and you feel you can kind of navigate both, understand you're connected to something far greater, and you always have been, you might have forgotten, but at some point in your life you're remembering. But then at the same time you enjoy your experience down to earth in the 3-dimensional reality, just like us talking right now.
No, absolutely. And the word I've got written down here, which you've alluded to a few times, is remembering, because that's effectively what we do. We're helping people remember. And whilst having all these books that we spoke of earlier and these resources are so incredibly valuable to help jog our memory, basically what we need, what we require, we already have, right?
Absolutely. And it's challenging. Again, I love those challenges. It's challenging to understand that we have everything we need within us, where everything out there is just waiting for us to go get it, right? But it's just the duality and the paradox of life, that everything is here deep within us to then allow us to go out and experience everything, both the material and non-material. And for me, coming home to myself and understanding that I'm okay just as I am, and every challenge, every perceived flaw, every perceived difficulty in my life is only for me to remember more, then at the same time allows me to go out and play in the physical experience that we're in here. So whether it is buying incredible nice shoes or a handbag or going for an amazing meal. It's all out there for us to play. But when we forget who we are and what we're here to do and what our purpose is, that's when we start to struggle and
definitely
experience incredible of, amounts of existential pain, whatever it might mean to various people, because it will show itself in different ways to different people, right?
And I think this is really important. I think we have to be very careful here when we're talking about this metaphysical, physical relationship, because we live in a physical reality. And part of that physical reality is we have physical experiences, and they will be different for each and every one of us. And where in some spiritual contexts, we're told that that's not a good thing, that we have to rise above that we shouldn't attach to that we should observe that and not experience that. But I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that part of the journey is to have these physical experiences, to enjoy them, to feel the joy, to sometimes feel the sadness as well, because it's all part of this learning process, this journey that we go on. And as such, we should look forward to these physical experiences. We should look forward to having these gifts, these meals, I'm not so sure I'll go out and spend quite a lot of money on shoes and handbags, but there are certain things that I would spend money on that people look at me and go, what have you done?
That would be incredible. We should go shopping together.
I should go handbag shopping, right?
It would be amazing. You know what, over the years of working with so many different people, some of them very conventionally scientifically driven, some of them very spiritual, very deeply involved in spiritual practices, and everybody in between, the people that I found were in most pain, and we're talking more the emotional side, but at the same time, every emotion has a physical manifestation somewhere in the body. So very often it will be a disease or a pain somewhere, or a syndrome, or a set of collection of symptoms. The people that had the most symptoms emotionally and physically and were in the most amount of pain were people that were at either end of the spectrum. So either completely denying anything spiritual and not tangible, or people that would completely lose themselves in the esoterical and the non-tangible world, denying the material and the physical existence that we're in here. And for me personally as well, over the years, the moments where I was the most cynical and the most questioning of everything, I suffered the most. And the moments where I was also like completely detached from, having my feet down on earth and being grounded here in this experience, and went somewhere out there into the clouds, proverbial clouds, that's when I suffered the most as well. So those opposite ends of the spectrum, but I still truly believe that we have to go both ways to find something that works for us in the middle. I can't remember whether we talked about it before, the concept of balance. It's more of a personal harmony.
Yes, we did. Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Right, personal understanding of balance, somewhere in between those two opposite ends of the spectrum. And my ends of the spectrum will be different to yours.
Absolutely.
And everybody else listening.
And I think that's very important to distinguish.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. And it's really important for everyone to remember that whatever seems true to us is true to us, and no one can tell us it's not. They can offer us a different point of view. Therefore, we can shift and change our understanding of what's true for us to what helps us feel better and live a better life and be at more peace with ourselves. But truly, it's about finding a place that works for us somewhere between those ends of the spectrum. But the only way to find it is to go both ways. So it's understanding that when we embark on this journey of trying to understand ourselves more, we're likely going to end up one way and the other, and then work out somewhere.
I think so. I agree completely with what you're saying, and it reminds me of that spiritual bypassing that people do when they use their spiritual practice to kind of excuse themselves in many, many ways.
Can you say that again? Because I lost you for a second.
Yeah, so I think we had a little bit of a fallout. Yeah, so I agree completely with what you're saying, Marta, and it reminds me of spiritual bypassing in so many ways, where people use a spiritual practice, but it's really being driven by their ego rather than their true self. And if I'm meditating, then I'm on the right track. If I'm doing this spiritual practice, then I'm on the right track. But fundamentally they're not really finding themselves. They're coming at it from an outside in perspective, as I like to call it.
It's placing the outcome on the external circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is something I truly believe we've all been there and we've all experienced that. And again, it's part of the experience of understanding that really this isn't how it goes. And it's fascinating whenever I talk about that concept with anyone. There is a situation I remember from a few years ago where there are two women that I knew and interacted with at the time. One was a client, one was a mentor, and both of them had the same practices, deeply spiritual, deeply connected to the self-development and devoted to self-development. And we're talking from meditation to journaling regularly to reading certain books and, wanting to utilize that knowledge towards their advantage and to build a better experience for themselves. And one was highly, highly successful financially and materially and in her experience in terms of the life experience that she was living, while the other one was very confused and very lost. And they were doing the exact same things if you looked from the outside, but the results were very different.
Okay.
And for one of them, you could see it was just something that was very natural. It wasn't even forced. It was just the thing she did. And of course, it happens through practice.
Yeah.
Because if it's something we haven't done before and it's introduced to us and it's new, of course we practice, and then it kind of goes one way or the other. We're working our way through the maze and figuring out what works for us, what doesn't, what we like, what we enjoy, what comes naturally, what doesn't. While the other person was continuously wanting to get the result from that at meditation. If I meditate long enough, I'll have an answer. If I journal hard enough and I write enough, I'll figure out what to do with my life. If I do this retreat, if I do that retreat, if I take this plant medicine or that plant medicine, that will be my outcome. And the outcome just never came.
Right.
And, it's, again, I can't say one was right and one was wrong because it just doesn't work that way. And for both of them, that experience was part of their path and part of their experience of learning more about themselves. And at the same time, I've been in both situations myself as well. It's very challenging sometimes to talk about things like that without passing an opinion, right? Because we kind of have to make our own stance and make our own judgment to figure out which way we're going. But at the same time, knowing that you don't want to make a judgment stops you from getting to where you want to get to. And that's what I also talk to my clients about as well, is that we can't live without judgment. We have to compare, we have to judge, but whether we're doing it constructively or destructively and which way we're going, that dictates our outcome.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned non-judgment, and I think that's so very, very important. In fact, an old mentor of mine once told me that judgment is weakness, awareness is power. So if you're spending your time looking externally and judging what's going on from that perspective, you lose all sense of awareness, you lose all sense of perception, and really you're just in effect you're coming from a victim mentality where you're saying it's not my fault. Mm-hmm. And really, if you're really gonna succeed in life, in my opinion, the first stage is you have to sit down and say, okay, I'm 100% responsible for everything that's going on here. And if things happen like the weather's bad or the train stop, I'm 100% responsible for my reaction or my response to that event. And then when I can come from that place, that gives me a sense of power. And if I can come from that place with no judgment, with no attachment to what's going on other than just saying, okay, I'm just part of this, but it's not part of me, then and only then do we start to progress.
Absolutely. I like using the word discernment because judgment has a tint of negativity.
Yeah,
it's still a perception, right? Every word we use and anything we do, every act, everything is just based on our interpretation of what it means to us. Life in its entirety technically is meaningless. It's us as humans adding meaning to every single event. But what meaning we add to it then dictates the outcome. So I like using personally the word discernment. So you're looking at a situation and you make your decision. You still, technically, you could describe it as judgment because you're judging, okay, the weather's shit outside. what do I want to do? Do I want to get angry and pissed off about it and feel miserable for the rest of the day because it's raining or it's cold? Or do I just get on with my day-to-day stuff and maybe change my plans and adapt my plans and do something slightly different? So that is a discernment, right? We discern, we choose what we want to do based on the set of circumstances that's unraveling around us. And being able to do that with that detachment from the outcome, which is a beautiful place to be, where you go, okay, it is what it is, and this is what I'm going to do about it or with it. And you continue. And very often it's, and tell me if you agree with that, it's in that very moment where the circumstances seem to be against us or negative or whatever it might be, not what we want consciously, but when we are okay with that and we find that place of peace internally where we go, okay, it is what it is. So what am I going to do about it right now? How am I going to respond? That's when we realize that it's actually leading us to something even greater than what we originally anticipated.
No, absolutely. And I remember being told, that's not strictly true. I was at a Jack Canfield event and he didn't say it to me personally, but he was talking about people he interviewed for his books. And the most successful people he interviewed all said that no matter what was going on, no matter how negative you could perceive it, they all interpreted it as an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And again, it goes hand in glove with your discernment point just there, that when you look at something, we have the power and the ability to choose how we see that event or that happening in front of us. And that gives us a real advantage as we try to craft and create a life that we want to live.
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite quotes that I've heard at an event somewhere. I think it was in Sedona in America, in the States, where, you know, in Sedona, you can find people that are deeply devoted, deeply connected to their spiritual side, and at the same time live an incredible life, sharing their experiences. But at the same time, there is a whole lot of people that actually place it outside of themselves, believing, oh, if I'm in Sedona, I'll be fine and my life will be okay. But that's a completely different story we could talk about. But it was at an event that I attended there a few years ago that I heard that your outcome does not depend on the circumstances. It only depends on your interpretation of it. So it's your attitude and your interpretation of your circumstances and the events around you that will give you the outcome. And, you know, there are those moments, just like those moments where we remember, there's those moments where we hear something or read something that just kind of get to us so deeply that in that moment, everything changes and you never, ever look at a similar set of circumstances in the same way again, because you remember those profound words that for you are very significant. So that was one of them. And when I realized that, I also realized that there really, truly is no problems in life. There are no problems in life. There is just opportunities. And yes, in the depths of the shit that hits the fan and the challenges that we all experience, it's hard to remember it then, that, oh, this is an opportunity. And you're like pulling your hair out thinking, I have no idea what to do with everything that's happening. But you get to the point through that practice. And Cliff and I had that conversation this morning, that without that conscious, purposeful practice, you might as well not practice at all. It was in the Craving Mind, the book that Cliff's been listening to on Audible recently. And it's just such a beautiful explanation of it. If you practice, you get to the point that even if you feel like you're in the most amount of existential or physical pain, you still somewhere at the back of your mind remember there is a reason why this is happening. Something will work itself out through it that will teach me something. I just can't see it yet. And that's something that for several years now has been allowing me to surf the waves of challenges as if I was literally out in the ocean and a massive wave was coming over me. And it was just taking a deep breath, ducking underwater and letting that wash over you and experience whatever is going on. But eventually you pop out on the other side and you're like, okay. And you look back and you realize you've learned something from it.
No, absolutely. And I had a moment like that really years ago when I read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is very, it's a hard read. You know, a man who was tortured and experimented on and abused in the Nazi concentration camps, but somehow found beauty in it all. and said, you know, that the last freedom is our choice, you know, and if I
Yeah.
don't give them that freedom, I maintain that level of choice, and I can choose to interpret this as something extremely bad or as something that can grow into something of epic proportions. And it certainly did for Viktor Frankl, who went on and taught, you know, the concepts of spirituality and forgiveness and freedom for years
Yeah.
afterwards. But you know, when we spoke on the last podcast with Cliff, and Cliff was explaining about how, you know, he sits with a client and introduces them to the concepts of health, holistic health, and so on and so forth. How do you go about doing that with your gift, with your spiritual reawakening for people?
It's fascinating. The thing is, I used to, when I first started exploring those concepts with our clients a good few years ago now, we're talking probably 2013, 14, I would prepare, and it would almost lead me from one conversation to another, and I would ask myself questions and almost put them out there. Everyone will understand that expression, right? I'll put them out there, and then I would go to sleep. Oh, what book was it? I can't remember what book that was. Calling in an imaginary board meeting of people that inspire you and people that you look up to. Was it Napoleon Hill? I think.
Yeah, I think and Grow
I
Rich.
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was his
So I would
mastermind, wasn't
literally,
it? Yeah.
yeah. So I would literally go to sleep, and the last thing I would do before falling asleep would be call my imaginary meeting, and there will be all these people that I feel inspired by, and I'll be like, look, I've got a session with this person, a conversation with that person, this with that person tomorrow. Can we just all together agree what they need, what's most important for them right now? And I shit you not, I would wake up with ideas, with like, I knew exactly what that person required at that point. And it was fascinating. That was me playing with the whole concept as well, of trusting that the answers are already there anyway. But right now it's even more intuitive. It's meeting the person where they at, and obviously the first initial introduction and the first concept. Like tomorrow I have 2 conversations with people that I haven't spoken to before ever. They both have spoken to Cliff, haven't spoken to me yet. I just get to know them. I just see where the conversation goes. Obviously we send them pre-screening questions, you know, regarding their physical health, and also I send them questions from myself to get to know them, their situation, where they're at in their life, emotionally, physically. So I have an idea, but it is literally that first initial contact is just a conversation and an exploration. And whatever comes, whatever questions come to me, whatever guidance, it's literally like I'm internally guided. And I just lead that conversation, and we see where it goes. And from then it just evolves into and unravels into complete and absolute and utter magic. And sometimes it will be just a conversation where someone just, you know, talks to me about their history and their family and their upbringing and all of that stuff. We obviously understand that we learn a lot of our stories and patterns in childhood. So it could be just sharing the story, and, you know, my little radar keeps going and picking different things, and I'm starting to connect the dots. But sometimes it could be things that powerful that, you know, a client realized how her destructive, in her eyes, behaviors were a complete and utter act of self-love. It was just a misinterpretation of what caring for yourself and looking after yourself meant to her because of her experience in life. And sometimes it's just that I speak to someone for the first time and they're like, what did you just do to me? What happened? I just pass on whatever comes to me and through me. And very often I ask myself, if I was to put that in a book, or if I was to put that in a formula or in a format, in a certain format, if someone was to ask me, how do you go about things? I don't think I'd be able to do that strictly, because it's just very, very intuitive. And whatever it is that's suitable to that person, I've come to a point in my life, and again, that's through practice and experience, where I absolutely and completely trust in the fact that when I turn up and I'm open, whatever is meant to be and whatever that person's meant to hear, whatever they're meant to tell me, that's exactly what happens in that moment. And that's the first interaction with them. And from then on, it just evolves and unravels into so many different things. And we could be going down the path of exploring our stories. We could be going down the path of more spiritual connections and more energetic things and the emotions attached to stuff that's physical. It's just, I wish I could give you a more concise answer, but
no, that's a brilliant answer, because it's something that I've spoken about before myself. In that years ago, I had a very much a formulaic approach to this kind of stuff, and I would go like, call one will speak about this, call two will speak about this, call three will speak about this, and that worked to a degree. But it always left me thinking, I really felt I should have spoken about this today.
Yes.
And so I eventually came away from that and started just saying, okay, there are certain concepts over this period of time that we're going to be together that I would like to express and explore. However, let's see where we go. And, you know, when I'm fully present with someone, when I'm fully open with someone, and when there's no discernment or judgment, and when there's no attachment to getting anything done other than just being in that space, that's usually when I have my biggest results.
Absolutely. And the clients will have the biggest realizations, the biggest understanding of what's actually going on, what their next steps will be, without even thinking that I have to figure out my next step or decide what my next action is going to be. Without even thinking about that, it becomes obvious because you're just open to whatever is meant to come. And very similar to yourself, I used to have a set of specific worksheets that clients would go through, and workbooks and concepts that I was introducing to them. And that was perfect for them at the time. And it would have been perfect for the way you worked with your clients. And I believe for us personally, as coaches or mentors, is the more we start to trust ourselves and believe in the fact that we're here to serve these people in whatever way we're meant to, without a structure, that's when you open yourself up to that possibility of anything.
And I certainly, from my perspective, you know, as I've gone more down this path, the clients have been more interesting, the opportunities have been greater, there's been more joy in the work, more love in the work, more compassion. And I certainly think for me, that's a very good thing.
Oh, it's just so much fun. And for us, I think the main turning point was where one of our mentors years ago now, we've worked with several, and I'm pretty sure you have as well. And just, she said to us, you know what, whenever I turn up to an event, I no longer prepare. I just stand in front of the audience and I just go. And I talk about whatever is coming to me, and they respond. And that's the greatest event she's ever had in her life. And even to the point where at one of the events that she went to as a speaker, there was nothing. And she stood there in silence for 5 or 10 minutes. And all the audience are staring at her. And she said, eventually realized that this was exactly the lesson she needed to learn, that even if there is technically silence, he's just teaching you about getting comfortable with whatever comes. And that evolved into an incredible conversation. And Cliff and I just dropped every PowerPoint presentation, every like preparation note, anything like that, before our events, before our calls with clients, during our retreats. And like you said, that's the most joy, the most fulfillment, the most excitement that ever comes from the work that we do.
And you know that it's what people need to hear. I mean, I can give an example. It will seem quite random, but just recently my stepfather passed away, and I was asked by my mum if I could speak at the funeral on behalf of the family. And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. And no notes, no preparation, nothing. I didn't know up until I walked up to the pulpit to give the speech. I didn't know what I was going to say. Yeah. I didn't know what was going to come, but I just trusted that what would come would be the right thing to say.
And what happened?
For 5-6 minutes or so. I don't remember anything of what I said.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing at all. And literally, no, that's not strictly true. I remember ending on a Rumi poem. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I remember that. I knew that it moved everyone because everyone was in floods of tears.
Yeah. And isn't it just beautiful when you can tap into that? And that's what are the guys' names that wrote the Stealing Fire? Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler, right? When they talk about flow and the whole concept of flow, when they talk about the STAIR principle, which is selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness of information, is when we tap into that. And again, majority of people will, there's a whole industry built around flow now.
Yeah, there is.
Biohacking this, biohacking that, and tapping into flow through this, microdosing and all devices, all sorts of stuff. It's something that is inherently human. It's innate to us. It's within us all the time. It's we trained by society, by school, by just the fact that everything has to be specific, classified. And there's certain things like we needed to have Google Calendar or whatever other diary that we use to make sure that we're on time for this at the same time, right? We're in different time zones. It's helpful to classify and put things in boxes for that purpose. But when it comes to our creativity, when our expression, which I truly believe is everybody's true purpose is to express themselves, and then how we express individually is our individual purpose, right? But the whole purpose of us as humans, I truly believe, is expression in some way, shape, or form. And that's when you tap into those moments where you just don't remember what you said. That's why I record every call with a client. And in case they want to listen back to something or take notes or whatever it might be, they always can listen back to the recording. Most often, I don't remember what I talked about. I don't remember what I talked about on our retreats. Don't remember what I talked about at events. I remember bits, like you said, you remember ending on the Rumi poem, and you remember that it had an effect on everybody because everybody cried. So, you know, it was powerful for them, but what it was, it's really irrelevant because we like radio receivers. We receive information from somewhere, and through the language that we speak, it just comes out, right?
Yeah. And I'm more than happy these days in my life, Marta, to just step aside and allow it to come. I don't have to take credit for it. I don't have to say it's my stuff. I can just allow it to flow through me and get, affect the people it needs to affect. I'm happy being that conduit, right?
Absolutely. The number of times where I had realizations and downloads about certain things and like woke up in the middle of the night or was halfway through making my tea or whatever it might be, just the most seemingly random situations where I physically had to stop and write or record an audio recording or have a conversation with Cliff and ask him for his opinion on that and just bounce off different ideas and concepts of each other. And then a month later, I'm reading a book about the very same thing. And I'm thinking, holy shit. And I truly understand that nothing is ours. We receive those informations, those messages through so many different forms, whether it's reading books, attending events, learning from someone, having dreams, whatever it might be. And we just then process it in our own way. And for someone like yourself or myself, we share it with our clients and assist them in wrapping their head around it. But for other people who might not necessarily be coaches or mentors, they'll be going through similar things and applying it to their own life and experience that they're in. And that's how it works. So it makes me laugh, the whole concept of competition or stealing each other's materials and things like that. I truly believe in giving credit. So if I've read something somewhere, I'm quoting someone, I'll mention who I heard it from. And if I'm using, certain materials and things like that with clients and they from someone else that I've learned from, I always give credit. Absolutely. But that's not the point of saying, oh, this is somebody else's work. It's all a collective. We're all in this together, and we're all using the things that come to us in so many different ways through so many different channels to essentially make our experience greater. And it's interesting this morning, and I'll be curious to hear your perspective on that. I saw someone post on Facebook a question, one of the colored backgrounds, and a question to everybody. Do you believe that life is suffering?
Right.
And that really got me thinking, because I looked through some of the answers, because that would be things that I would be talking to people about as well. And I've pondered on that plenty of times. And how many people just said blatantly yes?
Right.
How many people would say, oh, it depends on your perception and your approach and your attitude and your interpretation, things that we would probably say. And other people would say, absolutely not. It's all opportunities. Again, something that we've mentioned. And it's fascinating. You can't really define it as absolute truth because there is an absolute truth, right?
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think that whatever everyone wrote is correct, because everyone comes at it with their own perception, with their own awareness, with their own level of consciousness. So if someone says yes, to that, then they're right. If someone says it's all opportunity, they're right. If someone says it depends on your perspective, they're right. But fundamentally, there is no right or wrong.
There isn't.
There is no right or wrong. We live in a world of see. I look at spirituality as non-duality, right?
Mm-hmm.
That everything is connected, that everything comes from the same source, and it's an expression, an experience, and an evolution of that source. But in that comes our individuality, our non-determinism, our free will, that we can choose to live in the way we see fit, that we can choose to think what we want to think, we can choose to believe what we want to believe, and we can choose to act in ways that we want to act within reason. There are guidelines and laws for a reason. Now, depending on what someone wants to think or believe is true is really irrelevant, because what someone believes and what other people believe are entirely up to them. But from a universal perspective, there is no right or wrong. There's just a thing. There's just an experience. There's just a word. There's just a sentence. There's just a question. So I kind of look at it now as well, they're all right and they're all wrong.
Absolutely right. It's fascinating to be able to
look
at it that way.
And that's why I just don't get involved in it nowadays.
Yeah.
I just don't get involved. I just say to clients, you have to be 100% responsible for your own life. You
Absolutely.
have to be 100% responsible for your own shit. You know, if you stop becoming a victim and giving away your power, you'll discover you have power to utilize in other ways. The choice is yours. If you choose not to do that, then good luck and happy days.
Absolutely. It's fascinating when you can play with that. Everything just becomes easier and a lot more effortless. And even if you go, like I said before, if you go through challenges, what you perceive and interpret as challenges, somewhere at the back of your mind, you remember that it will all make sense and you'll learn something from it, and it will make your life a richer experience. And that responsibility aspect that we talked about on the podcast together with Cliff, which is the essential component of what we talk to our clients about, that awareness of something that's there that you either do or don't want to change in your life. And then you have to take responsibility for that, because if you don't, nothing's going to change, even if you take the next step, which is action, right? Absolutely. Without responsibility, that's when you play the victim, or you place your outcomes on the external circumstance and end up going back and forth and round in circles. And something else that you've just mentioned, the concept of free will, is just something that Cliff has been exploring a lot himself, listening to a lot of Sam Harris's work. And I think it was James Hollis. It's a fascinating book, Through the Dark Woods. I don't know if you've heard about it.
I've heard about it, yeah.
It is incredible. I think it was about 10 months that Cliff kept telling me to listen to it or read it. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I know. But there's like a bazillion books around me at any given time, and I just dip in and out of them all the time just for fun, because I love that. And eventually, it was last year at some point, somewhere through the middle of the year, when I finally sat my backside down and actually listened. Incredible, absolutely incredible. And it talks about understanding the meaning of a second half of life, which is not necessarily chronologically that we have to be 30, 40 or 50. It could be in the 20s for someone, in the 50s or 60s for someone, when you've entered that period in your life when you start taking responsibility and you realize that you actually can take responsibility and do something about the circumstances you find yourself in. And he talked about the concept of free will there in a beautiful way, where technically we're swimming in the ocean of influence every day, while at the same time making choices all the time. And when we can understand that, because someone will tell you that we absolutely have free will, but then someone else will tell you that we absolutely do not have free will. But we can understand that we are swimming in that ocean of influence from everywhere continuously. But at the same time, within that, we can make our choices, and we do make our choices every day. Life gets easier.
Yeah. And I'd just like to point out for people listening that what I'm not saying, and what I believe you're not saying, is that we don't have bad days. You know,
absolutely would never say that.
No, that sometimes shit happens, right? And we all get affected by it. So we're not holier than thou. We're not trying to say to people that, we're just perfect, because that's far from the case. But I love the fact that you mentioned the word action as well, because an awful lot of people that get involved in spiritual practices have this erroneous belief, let's say, that they can just sit there and utilize the laws of the universe to bring their experiences to them without actually moving in the physical world, which in my experience isn't actually how it works at all.
Absolutely not. But movement in our physical world is a reflection of movement everywhere else. It's a physical experience is a reflection of the non-physical, so we can actually witness it and physically experience it.
Absolutely.
And to me, it also works in the process of, in the way of processing information as well. As it comes in, it's a piece of information that becomes a knowledge and becomes a concept that we explore. And it's only by physically acting on that knowledge that it becomes that inner wisdom, and knowing that you go, oh, holy shit, it's how it works. But we physically have to experience. But the movement started way before, somewhere out there in the non-tangible world. So, you know, the thoughts that we technically can't grab and put in a box or touch, then turn into our words and then into our actions. And that's how we create whatever it might be that we choose to create, or sometimes don't consciously choose, but find ourselves witnessing in our life, thinking, oh, how did that happen? But when you realize, when you rewind and look back, you would have been thinking about it, likely talking about it, and eventually there was a set of actions that led you to that outcome. And when we can then embrace that process and understand that we can in fact have an impact and effect on it and guide and direct our experiences, again, it becomes a lot easier and more effortless to live our experience, even through the most challenging times and days.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you used that word effortless, because I'm as you may know, I'm a big fanboy of the Tao. And in the Tao Te Ching, they speak, or he speaks, Lao Tzu, of this concept of Wu Wei, effortless action. But it doesn't mean that we don't take action, but it means that the action we take is non-forced, which means that we have to be in alignment, which means that our thoughts, our words, our beliefs, our behaviors all have to line up with our core values, with our core vision, in order for us to take the action that's consummate with bringing that into our existence.
Absolutely. And it's remembering and understanding that, again, like we said, life is meaningless, but we add meaning to it. So it will mean something to us individually, something different to every single one of us. Life is also effortless.
Yes.
But it's paying attention to what comes effortlessly to us that gives us an idea of what we need to do next. Because for someone, like for us to chat here for hours, we could be sitting here till tomorrow morning and we probably wouldn't get bored. Talking about stuff like that comes effortlessly to us. For somebody else, talking about politics and problems and how the government is limiting, or how their health is determined by their genetics, or this is somebody else's fault, this is somebody else's agenda against you, that could become very effortless as well. So and again, I've come to a point right now, I still get pissed off, I still get frustrated if I hear my mom complain or somebody else. I take it personally sometimes, still myself, I'm not holy, right? But it's very different to what it used to be, where even 10 years ago, and Facebook memories are great for that, because they remind me of who I used to be and how I used to speak. And I'm like, shit, did I really say that like out loud on Facebook?
Who is this person?
It's hilarious. But it helps you just laugh at yourself more, because when you can laugh at all that, you can appreciate your growth. If we didn't see those memories, we wouldn't know how much we've changed the way we think and look at life, right? So when you realize that some people will effortlessly complain about their situation, and some people will effortlessly make their lives continuously a better experience for themselves, and wherever each person is, it is what it is. It's what they do about it. So when someone is ready, and I wrote about it today to our new group program started today, and I said to them, you're not here for us to help you make a decision about change. You've done that already way before you even came to us. You're here to be guided through those decisions that you've already made, and to make sense out of that. So when someone is ready to take that responsibility and realize, my effortless life consisted of this and that, complaining, moaning, whatever, feeling like a victim, I don't want to do that anymore, that's when they turn up on your doorstep, or on our doorstep, and they're ready to embrace something different and be guided. We're not here like, your job isn't to convince anyone, my job isn't to convince anyone. that decision is made way before people come to people like us, like yourself and like myself. And that's the beauty of that guidance. And if someone sometimes spends most of their life complaining, not being satisfied, not being fulfilled with their experience, it's still their path. And I used to be really judgmental towards that, especially towards my family. Obviously, the closest to ones, right? Is the most painful and uncomfortable experience, unless you choose to look at it differently. Right now, I had a conversation with someone about addiction and financial challenges. Genuinely, hand on heart, if I didn't go through living with an alcoholic dad, with my mom who was very emotionally detached, if I didn't go through depression and horrendous panic attacks, I just wouldn't be here understanding my life the way I understand. Were those experiences painful? Fucking hell, of course they were. Awful at points. You know, your dad not turning up to your birthday at some point, and you thinking he forgot about your existence, and you wanting to go shopping for your first bra with your mom, and she didn't. I had to go with my friend because she didn't know how to do it. Things like that, you know, significant events in you know, a child's experience and evolution and growth. But genuinely right now, it's such a beautiful place to be, where through all those challenges, all those amazing moments as well, because there's always a mixture of both, I can hand on heart say that collectively I am where I am because of all those experiences, and I can appreciate them and I treat them as part of my path and part of my journey and a gift in a way. Do I still get frustrated that I carry some of my family stories that I don't like anymore? Of course I get frustrated. But when you realize, it's that awareness point, right? When you realize, oh shit, I've just been repeating this for the last few months. Why did I do that? Well, now you can do something about it, right?
Yeah. And that's why awareness is so fundamental, I think. And, you know, you mentioned there that we could talk about this till tomorrow morning and not get bored. And this hour has just absolutely flown by. Don't you think? And we've literally just scratched the surface. So I think there's going to have to be a part 2 to this at some point, Marta. I really do.
Like a regular, maybe a monthly thing.
Yeah, maybe, because this just opens Pandora's box, doesn't it? But I'm also really appreciative of your time you set aside to do this, because I know how busy you and Cliff are. So thank you so very much for agreeing to do it again. And, you know, content is truly staggeringly amazing. And I'm sure so many people are going to get value out of it. And, you know, I certainly have. And, I practice that white belt mentality where everyone teaches me something. So thank you very much for doing that today.
I always say that to clients as well. It's always a two-way stream. They think they come to us to learn. We learn from them just as much.
Definitely.
It is beautiful. So thank you so much for this awesome experience. It was just so much fun as always.
Brilliant. Okay, Marta, thanks very much.
Thank you.